Okay, well, in the interest of respecting everyone's time, I think we should get started. Welcome. My name is Tim Root. I'm the Community Development Director for the City of Hercules. And I want to welcome everyone here tonight. The city has taken on a lot of new housing programs in connection with its general plan housing element update. And part of that program was to help make information about fair housing programs available in Contra Costa County available to tenants and landlords. So I'm pleased to welcome our partners from Echo Fair Housing and the Housing Authority of Contra Costa County, who are going to share some information. This webinar will be recorded and made available on the city website as well after tonight's meeting. So I'm going to turn it over to Jesse Hunter, who is an analyst with the Housing Authority, to talk about some of their programs.
Hey, Timothy, thanks for having us. Again, my name is Jesse. I am an analyst at the Housing Choice Voucher Program, or at the Housing Authority of the County of Contra Costa, and we're joined by Tony Safari, who's our Deputy Executive Director. Today, we're going to very briefly share what the Housing Authority offers landlords and renters in Contra Costa County to see if it's a good fit for you if you're a landlord, and to give you kind of a how-to guide for entering our programs if you're a tenant. The Housing Authority runs a couple of different main programs. The first of which is our public housing program. There are about 900 units in that program. The assistant stays with the units, so the families live in that one property and receive a subsidy. We have another large program with our project-based voucher program. It includes about 62 sites, or about 2,000 units, 51 of which are in Hercules. Again, these properties are privately owned, but they partner with us to keep designated units filled with assisted families. We also have a number of projects in the pipeline. But again, these programs are distinct because the subsidy is tied to the unit. Our largest program is the Housing Choice Voucher Program. It's a tenant-based subsidy, which most families are interested in, so we'll spend the most time covering how this program works. Voucher holders can lease anywhere in the county, and they can take their voucher elsewhere. They can lease from any private landlord in the county. Landlords are able to charge comparable rents, with the family paying about 30% of their monthly adjusted income, and the Housing Authority paying the remainder directly to the landlord each month. So it's a program that's designed to keep rents affordable for the families, while still being able to provide reliable, consistent market rate payments to property owners. Right now, the Housing Authority of the County of Contra Costa has about 9,000 families assisted through this program, and they receive the voucher either through a waiting list or a referral from a partner agency like the VA or the county's health services. Today, what I want to make sure of is that if you're a landlord or housing provider, you leave here knowing how to become a participating landlord and how to get in touch with us. And if you're a tenant, you know how to sign up for waiting list alerts, so that you can be the first to know when a new subsidy becomes available. This slide that we'll share gives kind of a brief overview of the steps to receiving assistance. Again, most families enroll in a wait list. Some families are referred to us through referral-based programs. Our programs require families to meet a specific income limit, and we can also provide certain preferences to move people up the wait list faster. For example, if they're elderly, disabled, live or work in Contra Costa County. There are obvious benefits for the families who participate in our programs. At its core, it makes rent affordable. Right? So voucher holders pay about 30% of their income towards the rent, and the Housing Authority pays the rent. Families can choose where they want to live. They can choose which housing type best fits their needs, and it provides flexibility with income changes. So if the family loses income, we increase our subsidy. If the family gains income, they pay more of a portion of their rent. The benefits for landlords are obvious too. We work with a lot of different types of landlords. It's not just mom and pops that own single family homes. It's also large property management companies that own apartment communities, condos, even ADUs and mobile homes are covered on our program. One of the big draws for landlords is access to a steady pool of applicants that can afford the rent, right? Because we make sure that it's affordable for the family. Our leads also cut down on vacancy time. So there's a lot of families with a voucher shopping at any particular time for a rental. The program works, or eligibility, your experience as a landlord works the same as it does now. The only thing that we would suggest that landlords take a look at if they have it, is any sort of strict requirement for applicants to make 3 times the rent. Since the voucher, in effect, accomplishes that for you and makes sure that the rent is affordable. Getting started as a landlord is as simple as finding a tenant with an RTA. So we can spend 3 days explaining how the program works, but the only thing that you really need to remember if you're a property owner and you want to participate is you find a tenant with an RTA. The Housing Authority, when we approve families to search for a unit, we issue the family a piece of paper that is named an RTA. If the family has an RTA and a voucher, the landlord submit it to us, and then we take it from there. So again, there's no litmus test, blood test. You don't have to run an obstacle course to join our program. We just have to find a tenant with an RTA and submit it to the Housing Authority. So recapping, the family searches for a unit. We get the request for tenancy approval. We complete an inspection. We review the rent to make sure that it's reasonable. And we have you and the tenant sign a bunch of forms. And then the tenant begins paying their portion and we begin paying our portion. There's a HAP contract. So there's one agreement between property owners and landlords. The HAP contract basically explains what our responsibilities are and what the landlord's responsible for. You still use your normal lease. There's no changes there. The HAP contract is just an added layer to cover our program requirements. But again, you don't have to sign a HAP contract today. If you're a landlord that wants to participate, we will collect that from you as the last step. The only thing you'd have to remember is to find a tenant with an RTA and submit it to us. Here are some easy ways to get in touch with us if you're a tenant or a landlord trying to reach us. On ContraCostaHousing.org. There's a contact us form. The contact us form goes directly to us. It doesn't go to our call center. It goes to our leadership teams here so they can get your inquiries to the right place. And if you're interested in just perusing some forms, ContraCostaHousing.org, big blue tile in the middle, it says tenant and landlord forms. If you're a tenant and you want to sign up for housing, there's a big blue tile that says sign up for waitlist alerts. You sign up for waitlist alerts by putting your email address and your name in there, and anytime we open up a waitlist throughout the year, you get an email. I'm going to close with this. Some people ask how much the voucher is worth, or how much they can get as a property owner on our program. This gives you an idea. The Housing Authority uses payment standards. That's basically the maximum rent that we would be able to contribute towards the family's rent. It is still based on comps. I know everybody thinks that their unit is the best unit in the area, and that may be the case, but we have to look for comparable units before we can approve the rent amount. I'm going to leave this on the screen in the case that you guys have questions or want to reach out to. This is Tony's information on the screen and mine as well. Again, a lot of information that we can talk about with the Housing Authority. If you're a property owner, the take home that I want you to have is if you want to participate and you still have questions, get in touch with us. But really, participation is as easy as submitting an RTA. If you want to find families with a voucher, post your unit on our website. And if you're a tenant and you're interested in accessing our services, sign up for waitlist alerts. We open waitlists throughout the year. They can open and close at any time, and you want to be the first to know. So big blue tile on our website to sign up for waitlist alerts. And I want to make sure that Angie has plenty of time to talk about the amazing work that you guys are doing in the community. So I do want to pass it off to Angie from Echo Fair Housing, but I wanted to thank you again for your time. And yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jesse. That was so informative. So I'm going to go on and share my screen so I can begin the presentation. There it goes. Can everybody see my screen there? Okay, so I am Angie. I am with Echo Housing, and some of you may not know much about Echo Housing or know very little about us. We are a nonprofit housing counseling agency. We are one of the oldest fair housing organizations in the whole country. We've been doing fair housing for 60 years now. And we got started, what happened back in the early 60s, some folks came together to fight against discrimination. And a small group were able to get funding, and we opened up our first fair housing office in Castro Valley, California, back in 1964, and we incorporated in 1965. Now, we don't have that office in Castro Valley anymore. It's long gone, but we do have other offices. We have our main office where I'm based out of in Hayward. We have an office in Oakland. We have an office in Livermore, and we have two offices in Monterey County. And we do fair housing in three counties. We do in Alameda County, Contra Costa County, and Monterey County. And even though, fair housing is kind of like the backbone of our agency, it's really where we got our start in the work in the world that we do. We have other programs as well at Echo Housing. So I want to talk a little bit about the other programs that we have at Echo Housing because my colleagues do really great work in those programs as well. So I'm going to hopefully my mouse, it was not acting very well on Friday when I had a fair housing training. So I'm hoping that my little mouse was going to work out just perfect now. I think she's going to do it. Yes. Okay. Wonderful. So these are the other programs that we have at Echo Housing. Of course, we have the fair housing program, which I'll talk a lot more about that later on. We have a really important program called Tenant Property Owner Counseling Mediation Program. And that helps both tenants and landlords know what their rights and responsibilities are. So we, for example, may have a tenant who calls our office because they have a habitability issue. They've got mold in the bathroom. The heater's been out. Dead of winter, heater's been out for 3 months. Or maybe a tenant says that the manager is harassing them, wanting to come into their home to make, unnecessary inspections or wanting to come in without proper notice. So tenants, as you can imagine, have a lot of different issues, challenges that they deal with in the rental housing. One being, I got a rent increase or 3-day notice to vacate. What does that mean? So those are questions also that come up a lot. And then also our property owners and managers have a plethora of challenges that they face as well in their work. So you may have a landlord that calls and says, my tenant has not paid rent for 6 months or 8 months or even longer sometimes. What do I do? What are my rights? My tenant is not, taking care of the property. They're causing a nuisance. We're having, guests over, making loud noise, disturbing other neighbors. What do I do? What do I do? And so our job is to give unbiased, objective information to both parties so they know what their rights are. Years ago, people always thought Echo Housing was more of a tenant-based organization. We're tenant activists, and that really is not the case. We are right here for our tenants, providing advocacy and counseling. We want our property owners to know too that they are more than welcome to call us. We want to help them. We want to help everyone in the whole housing community regarding issues that come up around housing. And we also provide mediation. So many of my staff members are certified mediator, including myself. And so sometimes a landlord and tenant really want to work through their conflict. They don't want to go to court, which I think is wonderful. They want to sit down and get help in working through resolving communication problems or misunderstanding. And so we're always happy to do mediations when people ask for that. We can do either in person. More than likely, it will probably be done on Zoom. That's kind of the way we're doing most of our meetings and workshops and mediations are all pretty much on Zoom these days, but we can do in-person stuff as well. We also have one of my favorite programs at Echo Housing, which is our home buyer education and counseling program. And that's for anyone that is interested in becoming a first-time home buyer. We have classes that we present every quarter or so, and we have wonderful speakers that come in to talk to our students around, how to prepare a budget, how to clean up your credit, started, what kind of down payment assistance programs are out there for you. So it's a really great program, gives you some great knowledge about things that would be helpful for anyone who is looking to become a first-time home buyer. Now, our most popular program is rental assistance. Unfortunately, we don't provide this program in Contra Costa County. We're not funded right now. We do in Alameda County, and hopefully one day Contra Costa will give us money. We can do it in your area here as well. But that is a program that we have that helps people with their delinquent rent or helps them get into a new place. They find a new apartment, a new home to live, and just need to get that help to pay their deposits. So we can possibly, if they qualify, we can help them do that. So let's talk about fair housing. Let's jump right in there. So what are we talking about when we talk about fair housing? Well, fair housing basically is the right that all people have to live in any type of housing they choose, as long as they can afford it. So I always tell my owners and managers, it doesn't matter, what a person's, what their background is, their national origin, doesn't matter who they love, doesn't matter if they have tattoos or body piercings or green purple hair, if they can be a good tenant, if they have the income, they have, good rental history you're looking for, they have the credit score you're looking for, they should be offered the place to live. So our job at Echo Housing, our great mission is making sure that people have access to housing. That anyone that wants the housing that they choose, they qualify for, they should be able to get that housing. Our job is to ensure that they have the opportunity to do that. Okay. So now I'm going to jump right on into the fair housing laws. So under the federal fair housing laws, we have what we call protected classes. And what we mean by that is that it is illegal for a property owner, property manager, leasing agent, anyone involved in the process of renting out, selling housing, is prohibited by federal law from denying housing, from harassing someone in their housing, for evicting someone, for lying to someone regarding the housing process based on that person's protected class. And these classes here, which are race, color, religion, national origin, sex, which also covers sexual harassment. That is illegal under the federal law for someone to be sexually harassed by a property owner, manager, maintenance person. Also, people who are disabled are also protected under the federal fair housing law. And also, people who are disabled have a right to ask for reasonable accommodations and reasonable modifications. I'll talk a little bit more about that in my next slide. Probably a good 30% of my caseload deals with folks that have disabilities who need accommodations or modifications. So it's a big topic in fair housing that we see, and many of my colleagues see it also that work in fair housing. It's a big issue that comes up. Also, any family member, or any family, I should say, that has a member or members in their household that are age 17 years of age or younger are also protected. It's called familial status. So basically, families with children are protected against discrimination. So these are the federally protected classes. And any state you go to in the country, you go to Colorado, you go to Utah, Wyoming, you go to, Hawaii, Georgia, wherever you go to in this country, they're going to have these federal laws, these federally protected categories. Now, later on in the presentation, I'm going to talk about state fair housing. So on top of the federal protections, California has additional protections as well, which I'll get into in a bit. So let's talk a little bit more about disability. So I do a lot of trainings with property owners and property managers and so forth. And one thing I always say to them is that it's really critical that you treat everyone the same. You're consistent, you're consistent, you're consistent, you're consistent across the board. However, if someone is disabled, they have a right to be treated differently. They have a right to ask for reasonable accommodation. An example of that would be, my classic example of that is, let's say you have a property owner, property manager that has a no pet policy for their property. So they have this property they rent out, but they don't want pets, and that's fine. Any property owner, any property manager doesn't want to have pets on their property, go for it. You don't have to allow pets on your property. But if someone is disabled and they have an emotional support animal or a service animal, guess what? That manager, that owner has to change that no pet policy and allow that person who is disabled to be able to live there on the property with their emotional support animal or service animal. And because these animals are not considered pets, so in that regard, there's no pet deposit that would be allowed. So the manager can't say, "Oh yeah, you can have your emotional support animal, but it's going to be a deposit of $500." That would be illegal. Or the manager might want to say, "Well, we do have pet rent here," because I don't know how so much in Contra Costa County, but I know Alameda County, where I do much of my fair housing work, more and more managers are charging pet rent for pets. And so that would be illegal for someone who is disabled. In fact, any kind of a pet fee, whether it's a deposit, whether it's rent, any kind of pet fee would be illegal for any person who has the emotional support animal or service animal. These animals are exempt. They're an exemption to that no pet policy. Now, there are many kinds of animals that can be a support to people. I know in my personal experience, I've had many clients that I've worked with that have had not just dogs or cats, which is the common animal that people have as a support, but we've had people that have had bearded dragons, they've had rabbits, they've had birds, fish. There was one case, it did come out of our office, but a sister organization that does fair housing down in the South Bay. This case kind of got a lot of attention back in the day, 10 years ago or so. This disabled young man had a snake. He had a boa constrictor snake. That was his emotional support animal. And the manager got wind of it and freaked out, as I probably would too, because I'm terrified of snakes. But the manager said, "You got to get rid of the snake. You can't have it." And the disabled young man was saying, "But this is my emotional support animal. I need this animal. I'm very attached to my snake. I need the snake." And the manager was like not having it and saying, "No, you got to get rid of the snake." So long story short, this young man was able to get some legal assistance and was able to get an attorney that took his case and filed a lawsuit against his management company. And the case went to court over in San Francisco, district court over there. And the gentleman who was disabled, young man who was disabled, he won the case because he was able to show that the snake had a very positive impact on his mental, physical well-being. It helped him stay out of the hospital. It helped him to keep his blood pressure down. So a person, just a big alert, a person might have a snake as emotional support animal. It doesn't happen very often. It's pretty rare, but it's an example of someone who has a need for emotional support animal, and that snake being that animal, that person would be allowed to have their snake. Now, when it comes to service animals, these animals are usually well-trained dogs. You imagine someone who has, who's blind, for example. They have a seeing-eye dog, or someone who is in a wheelchair. They may have a dog that helps them navigate around the world. I know years ago I was working with a woman who had epilepsy, and she had this adorable little dog that was trained to bark when she was about to have an episode. So people who were around her could be alerted that she's about to have an episode. It could be there, but make sure she didn't hurt herself, whatever. So dogs are usually support animals, and they're usually like service animals, and they're usually very well trained, specialized animals that help people who are disabled to navigate around the world. Also, people who are disabled have a right to have a caregiver, even a caregiver that lives with them. So the manager can't say, "Oh, well, Angie, you're the only person on the lease. You can't have a caregiver live with you. You'd be, not in accordance to the lease. Sorry, we can't allow that here." That would be illegal, because if I'm disabled and I need a caregiver, including one that lives with me, that manager, that owner must allow me to have my caregiver. And the owner can't charge me higher rent for having a caregiver, can't try to increase my deposit, can't harass me, harass my caregiver. That is a right that people have to have a living caregiver if they are someone who is disabled and they need that caregiver. Also, breaking a lease. There are times when a person who's disabled can no longer fulfill the requirements of a lease, and they need to get out of the lease early. In fact, I just was able to get one of my disabled tenants out of her lease because she was living in an apartment complex where she's on like the third floor. There were no elevators there on her property, and there were stairs everywhere. And she had had back problems that got progressively worse in a very short period of time. And she couldn't go up and down the steps. She couldn't go down to a laundry room, go to steps to go down to a laundry room, steps all over the complex. And so her request was to be able to get out of her lease early to find either an apartment that had an elevator or an apartment on a lower level that where she didn't have to go up and down the steps. And the manager said no, told me no. She signed this lease. She just moved here. We're not going to let her out. She's going to have to pay a penalty. The answer is no. Well, I didn't let that no stop me. I went above the manager. I was able to get a hold of the regional manager and talked about the fair housing laws. And in the end, the regional manager did allow the tenant to move out of the property without a penalty. She was able to move out. She gave 30-day notice, moved out, and she found a more suitable place for her to live. So that does come up sometimes where people need to break the lease. Closer parking space, that's really tricky because I know, I talk to lots of managers and they'll say, parking is so limited. We hardly have parking for people that, that are here. And then someone wants a closer parking space. Sometimes it's hard to negotiate that. And I understand that. I know, it's really important for managers to know also is that we understand that not every request you're going to be able to grant to a person who's disabled. We want you to do your best effort to have an interactive dialogue with that person who's disabled. You want to try to accommodate them. You want to get help from Echo Housing. If you're having a problem, you're stuck and you don't know what to do, call us. We do a lot of mediations around accommodations and so forth. But you do want to at least make your best effort. So, for example, if someone comes to you and they need a closer parking space, their parking spot is far away from their actual unit where they live. And so you might want to say, well, I don't have a parking space available right now closest to your apartment, but I'll tell you what, I'll put you on a wait list. So when apartment space or when a parking space comes up closest to your apartment, you'll get the first chance to get that parking spot. So we want you to just try your best, do your best effort to accommodate your tenants who may need that accommodation. So now we'll talk a little bit about modification. This does come up not as much as accommodations, but sometimes situations come up where a tenant who is disabled, they need to make a physical change in their home. So they may, for example, need to put a grab bar up by the toilet or in a shower, or they need to have a ramp built because they use a wheelchair or walker and they want to be able to get out of their home. Or let's say they're hearing impaired and they need to have a special light that goes off when the detectors go off. Or it could be they need to have carpets pulled. In fact, I'm working with a client, a family right now where a member of the household has severe allergies to the carpeting in their apartment. And the request is to be able to have that carpet removed and just have vinyl or, whatever put down in its place because it's making this family member awfully sick. So a request might be that person has to have the carpets removed. They can live there and they can breathe. They don't have to keep going to the ER every Saturday evening. Lowering the counters. Now, I have been at Echo Housing for many years. I haven't had this request where someone asked to have the kitchen counters lowered, but that is a reasonable modification request. Someone, maybe they're in a wheelchair and they love to cook and they can't reach the counter space. They want to have the counters lowered. That's a very extreme, job modification. Like I said, I've never had anyone ask that, but I have had many people who have asked things like, I need to get the carpets pulled. I need to get a grab bar put in. And so they will call to ask for how to do that. Now, verifications. Now, any person who's providing housing can ask that the disabled person provide documentation that they are disabled and they need that particular accommodation or modification. Now, what you never ever want to do as a housing authority, I had one person just ask me today on the phone. Actually, this person was an attorney, and the attorney asked me, well, what is the disability of the client? That is an illegal question. I told her that too. I said, that's illegal. You can't ask that question. So you can't ask a person what the disability is. Now, they want to share with you that they have MS, that they suffer from anxiety, that they're bipolar. That is up to them to share that information about their medical health. but you cannot ask for that information. You can, however, ask that the person who is disabled provide you with verification that they are disabled and they need this accommodation. Now, it used to be years ago that only a doctor could really write a letter verifying that someone is disabled, but that has changed big time. So now the number of people who can write a letter verifying that someone is disabled has augmented very, very much so. So it could be a person's doctor, yes, but it could be a person's social worker who could write a letter on their behalf. It could be a person's their therapist. It could be their chiropractor. It could be their AA sponsor. It could be even a parent writing a letter on behalf of his or her disabled child. So it's not just doctors that can write a letter, pretty much anyone that knows of a person's medical history, their medical needs, they could actually write a letter vouching this person is disabled and they need this accommodation or modification. So a lot of owners and managers they say, well, you have to go get a doctor's note. You got to get a doctor's note. And that just isn't the case today. Now, if a disability is obvious, someone's in a wheelchair, someone's blind, someone's deaf, then no verification would be required. Now, one question that does come up is going back to modifications is who pays for that modification? So the answer to that question is that it depends. It depends on who owns the property. Now, if it's a privately owned property, then in that situation, the tenant pays for that modification. If it's property that gets government monies that go into the property, like a lot of agencies out there provide affordable housing. I know in Alameda County, we have Eden Housing, we have Mercy Housing, we have Bridge Housing, Saha, and also Contra Costa County has lots of affordable housing organizations that provide low-income housing for people who are disabled. And usually those entities get public funding, whether it's from federal government or state, local government. And so tenants who live in those properties, when they're disabled and they need modifications, then the owner pays for it. Or the housing authorities, they have, multiple units that they provide, housing. I know in Alameda County, we have a lot of public HUD housing in Oakland and Hayward, other cities. And so anyone living in those properties, then the owner would pay for modifications. So once we know who owns the property, then we can let our clients know who's going to be responsible for that modification. So I want to go right into status discrimination. I want to just say I know we do. I think we have at least one person on the call. At the end of the training, I'm going to open up for questions. So if you have questions about anything that I have said thus far, you're welcome to put your question in the Q&A, or we could just unmute you, whatever is simple, and then we can answer your question. So I want to talk a little bit about familial status discrimination. So remember earlier I was saying any household that has children age 17 years or younger, they have protections against discrimination. Now, I have to say though, it's very rare these days in year 2026 where I get a situation, someone calls and says, this manager says they don't rent to children. Most managers today, most owners know that they cannot deny people housing because they have children. They got that memo. However, we find that many housing authority, and I keep saying housing authorities, many housing properties owners, what they do though is they have unfair rules, unfair practices, unfair policies regarding children. And so I want to talk a little bit about those policies now. So one thing that we see quite a lot is a practice called steering. Imagine, you're in a car, you're steering a car. And so steering happens when a property owner will put all the families, for example, all the families that have children in one area of the complex. And then all the families that don't have children, single households, or just families that don't have kids, they are put in another area of the complex. So you have two separate areas here. One with lots of kids living here, and one area where there's no kids. There was a case we worked on years ago where a property owner was doing just that. He had told his on-site manager, he didn't want to have kids living in the front of the property. So whenever a family came in to look at one of the vacant units, the manager would steer the family to the area where the families were. And what happened was we started getting phone calls from people who lived there saying, what's going on here in this property? All the families live all clustered here together in this area, one particular area, and we never see kids in the front unit. What's happening? So it is no secret that fair housing groups like Echo Housing do testing. We employ trained folks that help us find out what's happening out there in the housing world. So our testers pose as home seekers. We give them a profile, they go out to a property, they do a housing tour, they ask questions, they do a report, and sometimes they come up back with valuable information that helps us see patterns of unequal treatment, patterns of discrimination. So in this case, we sent out testers to this complex. It was in Southern Alameda County, and we found that testers that had a profile of having children, they were steered to the back units where all the families were. And testers that were single, or testers that simply they were part of a household where there were no children, they were offered the nicer apartments, the plush apartments in the front of the property. And so we had testing evidence to show that there was a practice, a pattern, discrimination. And we went back to the folks that called us, asked them what they wanted to do, and they wanted to sue the landlord. That's what they wanted. They were very angry about what was going on, and we helped them get an attorney, Chris Brancard, very well known fair housing attorney here in California and throughout the nation is fair housing all over the country. He took the case on. He sued the landlord, and the case settled. Most fair housing cases end up settling, and it settled also. The manager, in this case, it was the owner, had to pay $25,000 and go to fair housing school. I had to teach him. That was interesting. But he came to the class, and we did a training with him on fair housing law. So that was a good thing. He did get the fair housing education that he needed. So it's really important that owners, managers know that when you have property that's available to rent, that you share that information with everyone equally. You don't just tell the families about this one area or the single people about that area. You want to make sure that people have the opportunity to rent, wherever they want to on the property. So you don't want to do any steering. Sometimes managers think, well, we really don't want to have kids living upstairs because they're going to make noise, they're going to disturb neighbors downstairs, it's going to cause conflict. So we want to put all the kids in downstairs, lower level apartments. And that simply is not legal. I know, it seems like that would be logical. Okay, maybe it's just better to have kids all downstairs. Maybe it's safer for them. But that is illegal under the fair housing law. So you don't want to, steer people upstairs or in any other location. Let them choose to live wherever their money takes them. Different rules and policies. Sometimes we'll see things like, kids can't be in the laundry room, kids can't be in the rec room, kids can't go here, kids can't go there. Folks, kids are people too. They're tenants also, and they should have the right to share and enjoy the amenities there on the property as their parents do, as their guardians do. So you don't want to have policies that say, kids can't be in the gym, for example. Now you can have rules around safety. Just as if you were having a pool, let's say you had a pool on your property, you could have it posted, you should have it posted that any child 14 years of age or younger must have an adult with them. That's part of the California Health and Safety Code, perfectly legal for you to do that, safe for you to do that, you should do that. And if you have a gym, you can put it posted on the gym, in the wall, any child 14 years of age or younger needs to have an adult there with them because in a gym you have heavy equipment that could be dangerous to a child, can hurt themselves. And so it's fine to have those safety rules. That's not illegal. But you don't want to have rules that are just really over the top. Like, kids can't be, in the laundry room. There are some kids, older kids, who might do laundry for the family. They shouldn't be barred from being able to be in a laundry room. Now, if children, just as if anyone is causing a nuisance, is causing a problem, destroying property, you always deal with bad behavior. It's always your right as property owner manager to deal with anyone living on the property that's causing a damage to the property, it's causing a nuisance. But you don't want to just assume that kids are going to do that. You want to let them be free, let them use the laundry room, let them go to the gym or rec room, let them be able to have access to the property and the things that the property, offers. Restrictive rules, it has to do with supervision, has to do with, a lot of times managers will say, well, if your kids are outside playing, you must be out there with them all the time. And that can be a burden to families. Many kids can play outside by themselves and they can be safe. And they can, play in a way that's not disturbing neighbors. And so you don't want to just have a blanket policy that says, any child outside playing must have an adult with them. Now, if you do have a problem with a child who can't play on their own by themselves, they need to have good supervision from their babysitter, from their caregiver, from their parent, then that's fine for that individual child. But in general, kids should be able to play outside, be outside, and not have to have their parents with them as well. 2+1 occupancy guideline. This is not a law. This is just a guideline. It was put out several years ago, many, many years ago, by the Civil Rights Department. The Civil Rights Department, that's the agency that oversees fair housing here in California. And they put out this guideline called 2+1. And it deals with the number of people that should be allowed to rent an apartment or a home. It goes by how many bedrooms are in that particular home. So, for example, for every bedroom, a manager should allow 2 people per bedroom plus 1 person for the whole household. If it's a 2-bedroom townhouse that's being rented out, that manager owner should allow 2 people per bedroom plus 1 extra person. So it would be 5 people total. It is not a law. It is simply a guideline that was put out years ago to be able to allow larger families to have better access to housing because larger families tend to have children. So when you have occupancy guideline that's very restrictive, that means that it's going to have a disparate impact on families that have children. So we have this 2+1 occupancy guideline. Most owners, managers today, they know about the guideline, they adhere to it, so that's really great. But I want to make sure that we got that out for people to know about this guideline. Okay, so I'm going to talk just briefly about criminal records history. So in Contra Costa County, owners and managers are still allowed to do a criminal background check on any applicant. In many areas in Alameda County, where I do most of my fair housing work, they can no longer have these criminal background checks done on applicants. But so far in Contra Costa County, you can still do that. Now, if you are a property owner manager that elects to do a criminal background check on someone, first of all, you want to do it on every applicant, not just people who look a certain way or look suspicious to you. You want to have a policy that is applied equally to everyone. And if you do decide to do a criminal background check, we want you, and I say we, I say also HUD as well, who that came up with this guideline, we want you to have reasonable rules around the guidelines. So for example, you want to look at convictions only, not arrest records. Anyone could be arrested, be perfectly innocent. They haven't been, found guilty of anything. They've simply been arrested. So you don't want to use a person's arrest records to deny them housing. You can look at convictions, but you also want to look at how long ago that conviction was. So if it's more than 3 years ago, and that conviction does that have anything to do with that person's ability to be a good tenant? You probably can't use that person's conviction against him or her. Now, if the conviction was less than a year, someone just got out of Santa Rita prison, jail, and you might be able to deny them housing because their conviction is, happened, just got out of jail. So it's still very new conviction. But you want to look at things like how long ago that conviction happened. Also, the nature of the crime. Someone who burned down the apartment where they lived in, 2 years ago should be treated differently than someone who wrote a bad check at Trader Joe's. I don't know if people actually write bad checks anymore because I don't know if people actually write checks anymore. But so you want to look at, what that crime was. You don't want to just have a blanket policy. Anyone that committed a crime, anyone's been convicted of a crime can't live here. That's not going to go. It's going to get you in trouble. So you want to have reasonable rules around a person's criminal background check if you do elect to do criminal background checks. So now I want to talk about California. So in California, we have additional protections under the Fair Housing Law. We have marital status, for example. So it is illegal for a manager to deny someone housing based on their marital status, based on them being married or unmarried or divorced, single, whatever. You would think, well, of course, that's obvious. Of course, managers should know that, right? Not to consider a person's marital status. That shouldn't factor in, but it sometimes it does actually. I had a case a few years ago where a woman, she found an ad on Craigslist for an apartment, and the apartment was perfect for her. It was a good location where she wanted to live. The price was right. She called the owner who put the listing on Craigslist and said, "Hey, I saw your unit. It sounds great. Can I come down and look at it?" He says, "Yeah, still available." So he made a date for her to come down, check out the place. And when she got there, one of the first questions that the owner asked her was, "Where's your husband?" And she looked kind of perplexed, and she's like, "I don't have a husband." And he said to her, "Well, I really want to rent to a married couple." And actually told her that. And so that was discrimination. And she called Echo Housing. She actually decided not to pursue the case. But that's an example of marital status discrimination. Someone saying something like, "I prefer to rent to a married couple," or a person who hasn't been divorced, that is illegal under California law. Also, source of income is illegal. So a manager owner can't say, for example, "You must be employed to live here. You must have a job," because people have many ways that they can bring income into their home. They could be on Social Security. They could be getting disability insurance. They could be getting unemployment insurance. They could be getting alimony, child support. So those are legal sources of income, and they should be accepted as that. So now you can't say to a tenant, "You must have a job," or "You can't be on welfare." Because I know years ago, I would always see in the newspaper, in the listings, rental listings, it would say no AFPC, which is what the old welfare program was called. Now it's called CalWorks. But I often would see no AFPC, you can't be here, welfare. Today, that is illegal because that's a source of income protection. Also, ancestry is protected, similar to national origin, where your family originates from, whether it's, Mexico or China or Africa, whatever. So that is all included under ancestry. Also, members who are part of the LGBTQ community are now protected against discrimination in California. In many states here in this country, you could be a gay person, bisexual person, and be denied housing, and there's no protections for you for that. In California, we do have this as a protected class. Also, gender identity is protected. So people who, refer to themselves as being non-binary, gender fluid, people have many ways of describing their gender, transgender, so forth. And they now also have protections against discrimination and harassment in housing in California. We also have this peculiar little protection called genetic information, and that has never come up in my housing life at Echo Housing. But example of that would be, let's say someone had type 1 diabetes. They were born with type 1 diabetes or sickle cell anemia. And somehow, don't know how the manager would find out, but let's say the manager found out about their genetic, issues and so forth and denied them housing based on that. That would be an example of genetic information, and a manager could get sued for that. I think this more is focused under employment law, because I think one of the reasons that we have this under employment law is so that employers don't deny someone housing because they have a condition medical issue, because we don't want people who have medical issues to be denied housing or employment because of that. So I think this comes up more under employment law than it comes up under housing, but we do have as part of our FEHA, of our California for housing law. Also, citizenship immigration status is covered, and we all know what's happening on the federal level, and many immigrants are being targeted, both those who are here as documented and not. And we want to make sure that people know that we are still here in the business of helping people who are immigrants, helping people who are being denied housing based on their citizenship. In fact, Rob Bonta, who is our Attorney General, he's come out very fiercely saying, California still protects their immigrants. California still protects, all people. So we also want people to know that you can still file a fair housing case with us. If you have a situation where a manager is threatening to call ICE on you because you're complaining about mold in their kids, bedroom, that is egregious behavior. It's illegal, and we want to know about it. We want to make sure that doesn't continue. So that these are still protected classes under California. We still have these classes that are protected. Also, gender expression is protected. So example of that would be, let's say there's a woman who is very masculine, the way she talks, the way she dresses, the way she behaves. And maybe the owner doesn't feel comfortable with that, doesn't feel comfortable with her, the way she expresses herself, and doesn't want to rent to her. Well, that woman would have the ability, if she wanted to pursue, she could file a fair housing complaint with Echo Housing against the manager owner regarding gender expression. Also, members of the military, members who are veterans, people who served in the past, are also protected against discrimination um, under the Fair Housing Law. Now, most people have a very high opinion of our veterans and our servicemen and women, but not everyone. Someone might be very anti-government, anti-military, don't want a veteran or military person living on the property for whatever reasons. And that military person, that veteran, would be allowed to file a fair housing case against discrimination based on that status. Also, we have a newer protection called primary language, and that's an interesting one. So, what happened a few years ago? There was a man who owned property down in Los Angeles. He had an apartment complex, and many of his residents were monolingual Spanish speakers. So they, spoke Spanish. That was their native language. Language they felt comfortable with. And he told them, he said, you're an American now. You must speak English. English is the national language of the country. You can't speak Spanish anymore on the property. Crazy, it's true. And so he told them can't speak Spanish. And so someone got wind of this and sued this owner. And today we have this protected class, primary language. So what that means is that people have the right to speak whatever language they want to speak. I think in California we have like 200 different languages that are spoken or state. Now, the manager owner does not have to translate all the rental documents, all the lease agreements, or all the rules and so forth. The owner manager does not have to translate all that into a person's language, whether it's Spanish or Farsi or Cantonese. But the manager would have to allow the tenant to be able to bring in, an interpreter, a translator to help that person communicate with the manager, know what's going on the property. So primary language is a protected class under California law now. Also, Section 8 is protected. Yay! For years and years and years, fair housing advocates up and down the coast of California have tried and worked diligently to get Section 8 to be a protected class. I mean, for years. And back in 2020, our wish was fulfilled, and Governor Newsom signed into law SB 326 that makes Section 8 a protected class. So now people with the Section 8 voucher have the right to go wherever their voucher takes them. They cannot no longer be told, sorry, we don't take vouchers. And unfortunately, this is still happening. Like I was saying, 30% of my caseload deals with people who have disabilities and need accommodation. I would say a good almost third of my cases now deal with people that have a voucher who are being barred from renting. Their roadblocks are being put in, they're being simply told no, we don't take Section 8. So unfortunately, a lot of property owners out there still have not gotten the memo that Section 8 is not protected. You cannot deny someone housing because of their protected class. Also, there's a law that went into effect, SB 267, I believe it is, went into effect either in 25 or 24, I always forget. But this law deals with credit checks. And so normally a owner can deny someone housing if a person has a low credit score. You can say, sorry, we have a policy where we're looking at person have a credit score of, 620 or more. You're in Section 8 and your credit score is 600 or 580, whatever, we can't rent to you. Well, because we have this new law, it is illegal for a property owner, property manager to deny someone on Section 8 housing based on their credit score. As long as the person can show that they have the ability to pay the rent, be a good tenant, they should be given a chance to rent the place. And Jesse earlier alluded to, the fact that owners managers often have an income guideline, and you can have a guideline. You can say that anyone that lives here must have to rent to live here. That's fine. But remember, when someone's on Section 8, like Jesse was saying, they're not paying the full rent. They're paying about 30, sometimes up to 40% of their income on the rent. So you want to look at what their portion of the rent is and base your income guideline on their portion, not the market rent. We see a lot of owners doing that. They'll tell a person Section 8, you must make 2.5 times this, rent, which is $3,000. Well, that's not going to happen. They're low income. They're not going to make 3 times the amount of the market rent. They don't have to. So that's something that we're trying to really get out, educate our owners and managers about, how you must treat Section 8 folks. You're going to treat them a little differently sometimes. There's different rules, there's different laws now in place that protect them. And really, not only protect them, but just really allow them to have better access to housing. Because what happened years ago before we had these protections is that people would have a voucher and they would lose it because they couldn't find anyone to rent to them. And it was horrible. So we want to make sure that people are able to participate in this wonderful program that the Housing Authority has, providing safe, habitable housing to low-income people. And we have these laws that want to, just support our Section 8 tenants. We want you as property owners and managers to abide by those laws and ask questions. If you have questions about Section 8, we want you to reach out to your fair housing agency, which is us, and let us know what your questions are. Or the Housing Authority, of course, you have questions about the individual program, you want to reach out to the Housing Authority. Now we also have this big break. I call it my big umbrella, and it deals with what we call arbitrary discrimination, and it deals with things like age, for example, or occupation. We find sometimes there's a little bit of a bias against younger males when it comes to them looking for housing. I think sometimes owners think, oh, younger males, they're 18, 19, 20 years old, they're not going to be responsible. They're going to throw wild parties. They're going to, be loud. And we prefer to rent to someone who's a little older. Well, that would be discrimination. That's illegal. Or we'll get a landlord manager that has a concern. They've called us about their concern of renting to someone or continuing to rent to someone who's very elderly, someone who's like in their 90s. They're afraid, oh, they're going to fall. They're going to break their hip. They're going to forget to turn off the oven, and so you want to just make sure that you are aware of those biases. Those biases are illegal. People have the right to have access to housing, whether they're 18 years old or 98 years old. So that's something that comes up we see under what we call arbitrary discrimination. Also, occupation would be covered. So let's say someone is an exotic dancer or they have some other profession that you don't feel comfortable with. You want to deny them housing based on occupation. That would be illegal. There was a very famous case here in California where an attorney was trying to buy housing. And the fair housing laws, they deal not just with rental housing, but also buying housing, getting mortgages for housing, getting insurance for housing. It's all covered under fair housing law. And this attorney was trying to buy a house, and the developer denied him the ability to buy a home. He and his wife they had 2 kids and a baby on the way, growing family, and they very much wanted to buy this house, this development. And the developer came out and just told the lawyer, you're an attorney, you guys are these, you sue, you guys are difficult. I don't want your money. And so what did the attorney do? He sued the developer as he should have, and he won the case. So whether you're an attorney, you are a private dancer, you're a professional gambler, whatever, as long as your, occupation is legal, it's protected. And people should not deny you the ability to buy or to rent housing based on your occupation. So that's California law. So a lot of protections under California law. So let me just move here we go, my mouse here. Okay, so real quickly, talk a little bit about licensed childcare. So property owners and managers do not have to allow a tenant to run a business in the rental housing. So owner and manager could say, this apartment, this house that you're renting in is not for commercial use. You can't run, a business during taxes or baking brownies or, cutting hair. It's only for you to live here. The exception is licensed childcare. So if a person is a licensed childcare provider, they are allowed under California law to provide licensed childcare in their rental housing. And a manager can't, try to charge them more rent or charge a higher deposit, can't harass them. Now, the licensed daycare provider is solely responsible for the safety, the well-being of all the kids who live there. The property, should not have to deal with excessive noise from the kids from the daycare or, parents coming to pick them up. They're causing problems. So they really have to make sure that they're running a tight ship. They're running a professional business that's not negatively impacting their neighbors. But they are allowed to have licensed childcare in their home. Okay, so sometimes this hasn't happened, unfortunately, as well, but in the past, we've done workshops with people who are coming out of the foster care system who are very new to the house hunting process. We would give them these workshops about housing and what to look for. And so this slide here just talks a little bit about what we would talk to these young people about. We would tell them that as they're looking for a place to live, the manager may charge or may want to see their bank statements. They're gonna want to see, good rental history. They're gonna want you to put down money to do a credit check. They're gonna want to, check your income, make sure you have enough money and that's, verifiable income. They can ask for personal references. Now, these days, most owners don't ask for personal references. Usually, they're gonna ask to, talk to your previous landlord, previous manager, or someone else who knows about your background as a tenant. But they are allowed to check personal references if they want to. They don't say do it for everybody. They can do it. So this is what this is. It's just what providers can request. I think I went one too far. Let me go back because this is actually my last slide, but I had one before that. So I want to talk a little bit about advertising. Advertising is a fair housing issue. So when you are, let's say, a manager owner, and you're looking to put your ad out on, Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace or Zillow, or whoever platform you use to get the word out about your housing that you have for rent, you want to be cognizant, you want to be careful about the language you use because language can be discriminatory. As you see here on my slide, these are things that we don't want you to see. We don't want you to put this in your housing ad. Things like professional, working people preferred. So what if someone is not quote unquote professional? What if someone is a blue collar worker? They're a waitress, they're a bus driver, they're a plumber. Would they not be accepted or welcome in your property? Or to put down something like working people preferred. We don't want you to put preferences. We don't want you to have a preference. We want you to be open to anybody that comes to you that's looking for housing and not have preferences. Oh, I prefer someone who has a job as opposed to someone who doesn't, someone who's a nurse as opposed to someone who's a teacher. We don't want you to have those kind of biases because that can lead to discrimination, complaint lodged against you. You want to have housing, once again, available to everybody. So you don't want to have language that may people reaching out to you to look at your property. And these are just examples of things that, you don't want to see. Definitely don't want to see no Section 8. And sometimes, I'll go on Craigslist ad and I'll look at ads that are blatantly discriminatory and I'll flag those ads, flag it, and then I'll try to contact the person who put the ad in in the listings and say, hey, I saw that you have on here, Section 8, or must be employed, not suitable for children. That's illegal, and it opens up a conversation where I have opportunity to share information with that person about the fair housing laws. A lot of times people just they'll say, "Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that I couldn't say that in the ad. I didn't know I shouldn't say great for college students." So it's a lot of education that we do out there. Not every person that puts a discriminatory ad is doing it in a way that's intentional. A lot of times it's just them not knowing the law. So it's excuse them, but our job is when we see it to go right in there and try to provide education. Now I do want to just mention one thing here. Male, female, preferred. So there's exception under the California law where if an owner rents out a home and they have one room in their home they're renting out, so they're looking to get a roommate and they have one room they're renting out, they can do a same-sex preference. So for example, if it's a woman and she's got one room in her home that she's renting out, she can put in her Craigslist ad, female preferred. If it's a male and he has one room in his home that he's renting out, he can put on his ad male preferred. That's the only exception you can do for anything, for gender, anything. If it's an in place same-sex preference and there's only one room that's being rented out. Now, if a manager owner in this situation has more than one room they're renting out, they can't do a preference of gender sex, only if it's just one room renting out. So that's a little bit about advertising, and that is a fair housing issue. Ooh, go back here. Okay, here we go. So this is actually my last slide. This is my 9, a lot of M's here. 9 magic, magnificent manager tips. So in my many years of talking to property owners, leasing agents, managers about, their experiences, I came up with this list I think are, some pretty good tips that owners and managers might want to consider. It's not an exhaustive list, just some food for thought, but I wanted to share a little bit about some of these tips with you. So one of the things I always tell my managers and owners is that you want to let your applicants know your criteria. So if you know that, a person's got to have this income and this credit score and this good rental history, let them know that up front. Don't have someone put down money for a credit check and they are not going to qualify to live there. So be open, be transparent about what you're looking for, your criteria, and what's acceptable and what's not. So people know, oh, okay, they say no evictions within the last 3 years. Well, I just had my eviction, just went on, on the record 2 years ago. I'm not going to put my money down with my money to try to get that apartment because I won't accept it. So let people know what your criteria is. Also, if people happen to ask you, what kind of people live here in a property? I know sometimes agents, they're going around and they're doing a tour of the property, and an applicant, potential tenant will look and say, hey, who lives here? What kind of people live here? And the manager's like, I don't know how to answer that question and not get in trouble, So I always just say, just have a general answer, something like, anyone who applies here that qualifies lives here. I would get into a conversation of, oh, lots of immigrants live here, or lots of seniors live here. We have lots of families that live here. People want to know who lives on a property. Let them do their due diligence. Let them come back on the weekend after hours and look around, scope the neighborhood, scope the unit to see, who lives there. So I would get into a whole conversation about your tenants. Also, let people know why they're denied. If you are a property manager owner and you must legally deny someone housing, you should not have a reason that you can't tell that person. Let them know, we found someone that had, better financial history or whatever. We found, you had lots of inquiries or, lots of things on your credit, or we found this, you had, bankruptcy here in the last 3 years. Whatever the reason is, let them know, because if you don't, people go away thinking, I didn't get that play. Maybe it's because of my race or because of my disability or because I have children. So do yourself a favor and us as well, and the applicant that tried to rent from you, let them know, why you could not rented them, why you had to deny them housing. Put all rules in writing. Most of my property owners and managers are very good about putting things in writing. I do a lot of fair housing work in Alameda, and we have a lot of mom and pops there, and sometimes landlords there kind of, I don't know, they're just more informal sometimes, and they may not put all their rules in writing. They may just verbally tell a person what the rules are, and that's not a good policy. You want to make sure that everyone on your property that lives there, they know what the rules are. They get a written copy. You can have them sign off on it. You get a copy, they get a copy, so people know what the rules are. So it's very clear. My most, I think, important tip I would say is have a good open door policy. If you are a property manager owner and you respond to your tenants, you let them know that you are concerned about whatever challenges that they are facing on the property that you want to solve them, you're going to have happy tenants. You're going to have a happy environment. I can't tell you how many times we get calls where a tenant calls our agency and they'll say, the owner never returns my phone calls, never return my emails. I don't know how to get a hold of the manager. That is just not good business. People are paying really good rent for their places where they live, and they should be able to come and get help when they need it. They shouldn't have to wait for 3 weeks before they get a return call. You should have a policy where you return calls within 48 to 72 hours. And if it's an emergency, because you want to get a call to that tenant before then. But general inquiries, general questions, you shouldn't wait more than 3 days to answer that person's email, their phone call. Let your tenants know that you want them to be happy, and you'll have happy tenants. You'll have long-term tenants. You'll have people who are just creating a better a better home environment for everyone that lives there. So keep the open door policy. Let people know they can come to you freely. You'll be there to try to resolve the problem, try to answer their questions to your best of your ability. Keep good documentation. This is actually for tenants and landlords. I would say for landlords, it's not as easy to evict a tenant. So if you are thinking about evicting someone or has had to evict someone, you want to make sure you have documentation as to why you had to do that. So if you have a problem tenant, make sure you're documenting all the problems that are happening, times and dates and what you did and so forth. Because if you do end up going to court or getting a phone call from HUD or getting a phone call from Echo Housing, you can let us know, hey, I had to evict this person, or I had to give them a notice to vacate because of these reasons. So get into a habit of really being very conscientious in documenting problems. Because that could help you in the future if you have to file a lawsuit against your tenant, or vice versa, they have to file a lawsuit against you because they're accusing you of something. So you want to just both parties have really good documentation about any problems that are happening there on the property, because that could be very helpful if you do need to file a complaint or file a lawsuit in the future. That could be very helpful. Treat everyone the same, of course. Now, we know in reality that we're all human beings and that we all have our biases. As a manager, you may just love the people in apartment 103. They're just so friendly. They bake cakes for your kids when it's their birthday. I mean, they're just great people. You guys are both big 49ers fans, whatever, love them. And then maybe with people that down the hallway, they're not as friendly. They're not, they don't talk, they're kind of, just to themselves, and so you don't really care for them as much. It's okay. But what's not okay is we treat the different households differently. You want to make sure that everyone gets the same level of treatment. You may like one family better than the other. You may have more of a rapport with them. You may have greater interests, interesting things in common, whatever. That's fine, that's normal, but you want to just make sure as a property manager owner that you really do your very best to make sure everyone gets the same level of service. Keep getting educated. There are always different laws that are coming down the pipeline, especially when it comes to tenant landlord issues. And we have a wonderful tenant landlord staff that also provides for housing. Well, they do workshops as I do for my fair housing program. They do it for their tenant landlord program. And so as a owner, as a property manager, you want to make sure you keep abreast of all the new tenant landlord laws, ordinances that come up, and new fair housing laws that come up as well. So keep getting educated. I do fair housing trainings every third Friday on Zoom. They're called regional fair housing trainings, open to everyone. And it's just a really good way to get a lot of information about federal, state fair housing laws, and we have a chance to interact and ask questions, things like that. So you just make sure you keep getting educated. Call Echo Housing if you are a property owner or a tenant and you have questions about fair housing. Let us know. Give us a call, and then also get help when you need it. I know I have one property owner who sometimes he'll call me because, Angie, my manager and my tenant, they're just in conflict. They're just not getting along. Can you come up and do a mediation, try to help them work out the problems? And I go, of course, sure. And a lot of times it works. Having people sit down, talk to each other, can make a big difference. And so we're always happy to do mediations between managers, property owners, and tenants. Now we don't do neighbor mediations. So if you have two neighbors that aren't getting along, two tenants who are not getting along, we cannot deal with that issue, unfortunately. But if you're having a problem, if you're a landlord having a problem with your tenant, you want mediation, or you're a tenant, you really want to reach out to the owner for mediation, reach out to us. We're happy to try to get that going for you. Like I said, most of the mediations are on Zoom, but we can also do in person as needed. So that is the end of my presentation. I want to say, first of all, thank you for spending time with me on this lovely Tuesday evening. And I also want to open up to any questions that people might have. Let me see here in my Q&A box if I have it. I don't have anything in my Q&A. Does anyone have any questions? By the way, this is my contact info. I'm Angie. And so that's my email. People want to get a hold of me, my phone number. Vanjama is my coworker. She was supposed to be here tonight, but she got sick. I was sick last week and she's sick today, so she couldn't make it. But she actually is the point person for Hercules. But you can have your calls just directly given to me, and I can refer you directly to her if you like. And this is my phone number here, and just ask for Angie, and be happy to help you. So, any questions that people have? It's a lot of information. I'm happy to answer any questions that people might have. So none? Okay. Well, if something happens to come up 3 o'clock in the morning, you think, oh, I should have asked that question came up. You know how to get a hold of me. Feel free through my email or my phone number. This number is actually to the main office, which is you can perfectly easily find me at that number. But I also want to share my direct number, and that's area code 510-628-6118. That's 510-628-6118. That isn't located here on the slide here. It's just our main number. But you can call the main number here, 581 number, and ask for me, or you can call me directly, and I'll be happy to talk to you. So that's it, everyone. There's my presentation.
Thank you very much, Angie.
You are welcome. It's my pleasure.
Well, I'd like to thank our participant for joining us tonight too, and please don't hesitate to get in touch with Angie or me if there's anything I can do to help you with a fair housing or affordable housing concern. All right. Thanks, everyone.
All right.
Have a
Thank
good
you so much. Thank you, Timothy. Good night, everybody. Bye-bye.